My brothers.
The hillbilly.
Where do they live?
Repressed,
They
social
live back over
outsiders.
that way.
How has the hillbilly been constructed as an outsider? And what does this representation suggest to us about American national identity? The hillbilly provides a deep understanding of America's landscape because it simultaneously inhabits a place that is within it, but also outside it altogether. This essay will explore how the hillbilly's image has been constructed through the process of hegemony in order to create a social other. Theoretical frameworks by Edward Said and Sigmund Freud will be used to determine the reasons for this social othering. Furthermore, the relationship between the hillbilly and American national identity will be deconstructed through analysis of mediated stereotypes and the representation of this icon in contemporary American discourse. This will provide an insight into both how and why the hillbilly has been classified as a social outsider, and will also reveal the truth behind this heavily mythicized group of people. Originating in the Appalachian and Ozark mountain regions, hillbillies are generally regarded as rural people who are often poor and of European descent. The New York Journal described them in 1900 as a free and untrammeled white citizen of Tennessee who lives in the hills, has no means to speak of, dresses as he can, talks as he pleases, drinks whiskey when he gets it, and fires off his revolver as the fancy takes him. Due to their geographical remoteness and their outcasting within the American psyche, hillbillies are seen both physically and ideologically as a social other. An other is a person or group of people who do not conform to social norms. For example, the hillbilly are excluded from American society because they are lower class, withdrawn from society, and acceptable of antisocial behaviour, all of which are in contrast to societal norms. Therefore, hillbillies are regarded as a threat to American culture and its apparent civilized principles. While Edward Said's groundbreaking work in Orientalism is often looked at in terms of race, his theory can also be used when analysing the hillbilly with regards to class. Orientalism is described by Said as a Western style for dominating, reconstructing, and having authority over the Orient. In this case, however, it can be applied to the upper echelons of American society having authority over the lower echelons. Hillbillies, who are white citizens and therefore should conform to the societal norm of American whiteness, are still rejected as an other. Orientalism explores how this process of othering is deeply rooted in hegemony. Hegemony is described by Antonio Gramsci as a dominant force which leads the classes which are its allies and dominates those which are its enemies. Said states, "It is hegemony that gives Orientalism the durability and strength it possesses." It is clear that hillbillies, or the stereotypes of them, do not share typical American social norms such as living in society alongside others, having a job, or being well educated. Thus, a process of othering commences. Sigmund Freud, in his book Civilization and Its Discontents, argued that what we call our civilization is largely responsible for our misery, and that we should be much happier if we gave it up and returned to primitive conditions. The hillbilly could be said to have remained in these primitive conditions, and this is the reason why they are seen as ideologically separate from American civilization. To many, the hillbilly holds negative connotations. However, their way of life is also idealized. They live by their own means, are not bound by social norms or society's constraints, and therefore do not give up their personal freedom, which many other people do. It is interesting how the middle class, for example Henry David Thoreau, are so eager to escape to the wilderness and reclaim this freedom, even when this way of life is demonized. American society, and the media, still intentionally portray hillbillies as the antithesis of Freud's concept of civilization: dirty, unruly, lower in class, vulgar and undisciplined. Freud would argue this misery, which plagues civilization, is being repressed by middle-class America through the construction of the hillbilly, a figurative embodiment of their misery. Moreover, civilization is also depicted by Freud as the whole sum of achievements and the regulations which distinguish our lives from those of our animal ancestors. The hillbilly could therefore represent our animal ancestors, a group who have traded in the tools of civilization to rely on backwards and savage animal instincts. In a similar way, Native Americans did not conform to typical white European ideals when the first settlers arrived upon their shores. They, too, were regarded as uncivilized, in need of taming and requiring salvation, just like the hillbilly. This links back to Said's Orientalism, as he talks in depth about the prejudice constructed between Europeans and the Orient, which can be applied to the systematic oppression of Native Americans by white America. This dichotomy between the civilized and the uncivilized results in both the Native Americans and the hillbilly being classed as an other, either by race or economic and social status. This displays how America perceives itself and its national identity, as there are incredibly rigid ideas of whiteness and Americanness that aim to dominate anything which threatens such an ancient criteria. Freud states that all humans hold uncivilized tendencies within their id, but repress them in order to form civilized communities. Therefore, mainstream America's portrayal of the hillbilly provides beneficial results. It allows the middle class to repress their innate physical and sexual desires which are most associated with the hillbilly. This can be seen as a physical representation of Freud's theory of the human psyche. The id is the dark, inaccessible part of our personality, which seeks instant gratification and pleasure. The superego, on the other hand, controls our sense of right and wrong and strives for the idea of perfection. The ego serves as the reality principle, which operates how we present ourselves to society and therefore suppresses the will of the id. The hillbilly can be deemed as an unleashing of the untamed id, and, in turn, white, middle and upper class America are represented by the superego, an idealized perfection. American society, which is constantly striving for this perfection, sees the id, and therefore the hillbilly, as a hostile assault on bourgeois life, by reducing the hillbilly as a stereotypical other, or as Harkins describes, a negative counterexample. The white, civilized middle class can insert a physical and ideological separation between them and their uncivilized desires, which are projected onto the image of the hillbilly. Freud names this an ego defense mechanism. Instead of middle class America acknowledging desires which are discordant with civility, they are repressed to reaffirm their status and power within civil society. This is supported by Harkins, as he states that the term hillbilly rose to prominence during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Forcing the middle class to confront a physical representation of their repressed id. Moreover, due to the whole country experiencing economic hardship, the othering of the hillbilly allowed the nation to reaffirm its own image, while restoring the balance of power by placing so-called white trash, who may have been just as poor as many of the middle class who had lost their money, lower within the social hierarchy. This reveals a strong burden within the American consciousness. People fight so hard for the American dream, which may not even be achievable, so when they believe they have reached middle or upper class status, they protect this at all costs. In the case of the hillbilly, this is done by projecting social insecurity onto rural, poor people who do not have the benefit of a class-based hegemonic power structure behind them. The hillbilly has permeated American popular culture, with stereotypes of white trash and caricatures who like to fuss and fight being proliferated through film, television and cartoons such as Deliverance, Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, and Family Guy. This discourse surrounding the mocking or criticism of hillbilly life promotes the use of derogatory slurs such as a savage, or thinking that hillbillies are in some way backwards. Whereas, Vice magazine interviewed one young man who identifies as a hillbilly. He explained, "A real hillbilly is someone who lives for the hills, who really does care for their fellow man and their land, and not the antisocial stereotype which is propagated throughout the media." Linking back to the relationship between Native Americans and hillbillies as both social others, one can see the similarities in ideology. Both love the earth and their land. Therefore, white America's obsession with modernity, industrialization and manifest destiny may mean that they are simply incompatible with these others. The only option is to ostracize them, or in the case of the Native Americans, destroy them. Roland Barthes' Mythologies explains why such mediated messages come to mind when one hears the slur hillbilly. The signifier, or the true image of rural people from the Appalachian or Ozark regions, has been signified by the term hillbilly and its associated negative connotations, which creates a sign, the hillbilly. Over time, this sign is continually signified further to create an ever-evolving, always discriminating sign. Therefore, society is conditioned by hegemonic discourse to hold a certain response. Michel Foucault states that the societal discourse on a topic, like the hillbilly, limits and defines how a topic can be conceptualized or what can be said or known about a particular topic. This suggests that the myth of the hillbilly will limit and define the icon, further inferring that the hillbilly will forever be denigrated, for it is trapped within the confines of America's hegemonic values. Again, by marginalizing this group of people, middle-class America are reaffirming their national identity as civilized, moral people who represent the nation on the global stage. Anything else unusual is an anomaly. Hegemony thus serves to punish those deemed as outsiders and keep them from breaching the walls of civilization. The hillbilly is also often treated as a scapegoat for major political and social decisions. As MacArthur acknowledges, the white trash stereotype fits the definition of a scapegoat, for they hold biological, economic, geographical, regional, cultural and moral differences. Appropriated for right-wing politics and associated with white supremacy, the political use of the hillbilly has particular relevance in the current political climate, with hillbillies being used as a scapegoat for Donald Trump's presidential victory. Trump supporters, and therefore hillbillies, were deemed social and political outsiders by the mainstream liberal press. They are not part of what it means to be American, for anyone with civilized morals and the so-called right view would have laid their support elsewhere. This again links with the media and the power of hegemony in shaping the stereotype of hillbillies as racist and uneducated. They become a scapegoat, meaning there is no credibility in Trump's rise to power. The idea of an enlightened civilization thus lives on. The hillbilly is a socially constructed other, whose image maintains a distinct and exclusive bourgeoisie. Middle-class America inherently needs this separation in order to protect its higher status and apparent civilized and truly American ideals. Through the frameworks of Said and Freud, it is clear the hillbilly stereotype serves to demonize the group as a social other. Whether this is done to repress middle-class America's id or to reaffirm them as the pillars of society, it is undeniable that the hillbilly has been constructed by higher powers, or hegemony, and mythologized through what Barthes describes as a process of sign building within the American discourse. Indeed, how can the hillbilly be part of America's makeup if they are savage, backwards, and untamed?